All right, let's do it. Welcome, everyone. My name is Sahil, and I am a co-director of the Unwiring team. We are so thrilled to have all of you with us today. Today, we'll be chatting with the leading researchers, clinicians, and activists who are helping us navigate this new world of social media. And maybe equally exciting, we have over 170 registrants, many of whom will hopefully trickle in over the course of our time together from across the country, including young people, parents, educators, some industry workers. Whether you know it or not, each of you is supporting a growing movement to ensure our generation has a much healthier experience with social media than we do now. So, on behalf of the whole Unwiring team, we want to thank each of you for taking this precious time out of your Saturday mornings or afternoons, wherever you are in the country, to be part of this important conversation. We each have our own why as to what brought us into this work or to this youth summit specifically. Maybe it's a friend or child or student struggling with mental health. Maybe you're concerned with loneliness or misinformation or the health of our democracy. Or maybe you're just simply worried that this tool is monopolizing more of your attention than you'd like. For me, that why has always been centered around authentic connection. I worry that social media is isolating us, where we're connecting without feeling deeply connected. At the same time, I'm also optimistic. More and more young people are aware of how social media has been impacting our well-being, and together our voices are so critical to reshape the world we'd like to inherit. So, thank you so much for joining today's summit and for the role each of you plays in your communities. We're beyond excited to introduce this really inspiring group of speakers today, in which with each speaker, we'll be holding space for Q&A at the end of each presentation. So please make sure to submit any questions to the Q&A tool on this Zoom webinar. With that, it is my pleasure to introduce our first speaker, Professor Hancock. He began his career as a customs officer on the Canadian border, where he first learned about deception and misinformation. Today, he is the Harry and Norman Chandler Professor of Communication at Stanford University, founding director of the Stanford Social Media Lab, and co-director of the Cyber Policy Center. He and his team are world experts on the psychological and interpersonal processes within social media. His TED Talk has been viewed over 1 million times. His research has been very widely published, and he plays a central role in helping the White House develop social media policy. It is an honor to have you here. And Professor Hancock, take it away.
Thank you, Sahil. Thank you so much for that introduction. And thank you all for joining us on a Saturday morning. I really liked Sahil's introduction, which focused on both the harms that can come out of using social media as well as the positives, the reasons that we do use it. And so today I have two jobs. The first will be to talk about the National Academy of Sciences report that just came out in December and that I was on the committee for. I'm going to talk about what the evidence that the committee examined has to say about the questions around social media and harms and benefits. And I also want to end with a little bit of our own view here at Stanford of how we're thinking about it, which matches very much what Sahil was introducing, which is how we can take back control for ourselves. I'll talk a little bit about some of the mindset work that my student Angela Lee has been working on as a way of rethinking that. And then I'm excited to hear about all the other speakers. I know Dr. Moreno's got a new way of thinking about that I think is also really exciting. So let me dive in. The National Academy of Sciences strikes these committees in response to key questions. And so this question was, what does the evidence have to say about social media and its causal effects on either harmful psychological outcomes or beneficial ones? And so the committee spent a year working on this topic. We had about 12 experts on the committee. We had a set of staff working on it. We brought in experts from all sides of the debate and worked on it over a year. And the reports focused on one chapter, for example, is on benefits, and another chapter is on harms. And I'll cut to the chase. What we ended up concluding is that there is not sufficient evidence to draw causal conclusions about the role of social media at a population level for either the benefits or the harms. And so I'll unpack that a little bit. What we mean there is that when we look at all the evidence in the scientific literature, so the field of evidence, all of the studies, there are dozens of meta-analyses and systematic reviews. There are hundreds and hundreds of studies on this topic. And that the quality of that evidence wasn't sufficient to say that, yes, using social media for this amount of time or this often leads to these benefits. Benefits could include, feeling connected, social capital, those sort of things, or the harms, feeling depressed or anxious or lonely. And so that isn't to say that we didn't take a look at what are the possible benefits and harms, rather just to say that to date, we don't have sufficient causal evidence. There's a couple of reasons for why we don't have causal evidence. One is that this is a really difficult thing to study. Social media has become such a important and a ubiquitous part of many people's media diet that it's difficult to tease it apart from many other things that are taking place in life. A lot of the research is correlational. Correlational research isn't problematic on its own. It's an important way of knowing, although it doesn't allow us to get a lot of causal data. Some of the people that testified to our committee have argued that there is sufficient correlational evidence that we can make causal claims. And so John Haidt's book, he makes that argument that there's sufficient correlational evidence. But the committee, relying on sort of scientific claims about causal evidence, didn't come to that conclusion. There's also not a lot of longitudinal research. Longitudinal research is where we can look at the effects of something from time 1 to time 2. So when I'm using social media at this time 1, how does that lead me to feel about my well-being at time 2? Or vice versa, how does my well-being at time 2 affect my experience at time 1? Which is something that we don't often think about, but actually in one of our meta-analyses that we did, the only relationship at a longitudinal level was somebody's somebody's well-being at time 1 drove their social media use later. So if you're feeling lonely or anxious, you were at time 1, you were more likely to be using social media later. So it's also possible that we use social media as a way to modulate and moderate our well-being. Last is looking for experiments. These are really difficult to do, expensive and hard, and there just aren't that many of them. They require treating people or having people randomly assigned to using them or not. And there's just not a lot of them out there. Now, there is evidence at the correlational level, and there are some studies that use other methods that do point to increases in anxiety and depression, small but significant effects. And there are also individual studies that show small but significant effects on positive outcomes of well-being. So people that use social media, if we look at it at a really high level, have an increased association with anxiety and depression, small but significant, as well as feeling more socially connected, having higher levels of social well-being. So it could be that there's trade-offs. When we use it for reasons that are beneficial, but that also comes with some negatives. That's one possibility. Another important possibility is that we're ignoring the sort of elephant in the room, which is it's not whether you're using social media or not, but how and what you're doing with it. So as an example, if I use social media to share photos and videos about this awesome summit that we're doing today with my friends and family, that will have positive psychological benefits for me. If I use it the same amount of time, same frequency, so I use it once and I use it to share photos about somebody that I dislike, or I use that time to stalk, say, an ex-partner, that's going to have really bad psychological outcomes for me. And so we have argued that we need to move away from simply the question of using social media or not to what is it you're doing and what content and with who. And it seems obvious once I say it, but we really need to move towards that sort of more content and objective kind of model. The other really important point that came out of the report and our review of the whole literature is the concept of heterogeneity. Heterogeneity is a fancy way for us to talk about people are different. So one of the biggest trends over the last 5 years in the research is recognition that different people have different responses to their use of social media. On one end of the population, there are people that when they use social media, it does not appear to be healthy for them and actually can be quite problematic. We're still working out what leads somebody to be in that space, to be somebody that is struggling with social media for which it's harmful. Some early work suggests that it's people that already have an underlying psychological concern, and that when they then go on to use social media, it can exacerbate that. But we don't really have a good understanding yet of what makes some people really susceptible to the negative aspects of social media. On the other side of the population, there are people for whom social media is incredibly important. It is like a lifeline. In this case, we're still also trying to understand what leads people to find social media so powerfully important. We have some anecdotal evidence that those are people for whom their identity, for example, doesn't fit very well in their community. So you're a conservative kid in, say, San Francisco, where I live. It might be difficult to present your views there, or you're an LGBTQ kid living in a rural area where that's not a welcome identity. And so social media acts as a lifeline for some folks to do that. And then there also appears to be a large amount of the population of adolescents for which social media isn't as large of a factor in their well-being as the many other things we know are connected to our well-being, like exercise, diet, sleep, and a feeling of belongingness. So those things are much more important to their well-being than their use of social media. And social media seems to have not a very important role in their lives relative to these other things. And so we're trying to think about ways in which we can move people into that space where it plays a role in their life and they can optimize that role by having it achieve the positive parts for their well-being while reducing the negative. The most commonly reported negative when we looked across the board were things around feeling out of control. So that sense of like, I'm addicted, or I have an inability to use it at a time when I want to, or for an amount that I want. And this isn't just important for the individual, this is also important for families. The number one concern that most families report now is conflict around technology. And so this is a really important issue for families more general. What can we do? What can we do? There's a few things that the report recommends. We have a series of recommendations. I'll go over a couple with you here. And then I'll end with the mindset work that I wanted to share with you. One set of recommendations is around research. We need more research that can get at some of the causal aspects rather than simply the correlational. And that work needs to do a couple of things. One, we need to focus on what people are doing and the content they're consuming, rather than just simply time spent. Relatedly, and I'm really pleased that the American Psychological Association's report that came out last week really takes this approach. We needed to look at what we call the affordances of social media, so the different things that we can do with it. So for instance, messaging can be really valuable. Simply scrolling and spending time looking passively at a feed may not be that beneficial. It may not be harmful, but it may not be beneficial. Using video like this, which in my lab, we take a very broad view of social media, can be very psychologically beneficial. At least for me right now it is, and I hope it is for you as well. So this idea of looking at affordances rather than just the general idea. So we need more research. Another recommendation is making the platforms more transparent so that we can do bigger and better research. And we're seeing this coming into force with regulations out of Europe, including the DSA, Article 34 and 35 actually require us, scientists and the platforms, to identify specific harms and benefits and to measure those. So I'm really excited about how we're going to be moving forward on that. Another major sort of bucket of recommendations was around helping adolescents become better at using social media in a way that supports their goals. I think Saahil and some of his other colleagues, when we've had them present, we're hearing that they just feel that we threw them in to this technology without any support. And a lot of young people feel that they didn't have the education, the knowledge, the tools to use this in a way that was useful for them and not for other people. And so we're arguing that we need something like a digital literacy program, in the same way that we said, hey, look, you got to be able to read and write back in the 20s and 30s. And we really made a push to make that a core learning objective for all kids in the United States. In the 80s, we then decided that statistics was important to be a citizen and understand how voting works. And so we made statistics in high school be required. We need something similar. It can't just be a half-hour workshop once a year for students in high school, right? This is too important. It's too big, and it's too much of a central part of young people's lives. So it needs to be embedded in schools and become a way of giving young people the tools to become agents of their use, rather than feeling that they are the ones that are just simply being used. So that brings me around to my last thing. So this is a new way of thinking about the research that tries to understand, well, how do we make sense of this heterogeneity in people and in outcomes? How do we make sense of the fact that I could be using social media in a way that's not good for me, that's quite harmful, and all the evidence we show that there are some people that really have struggled with it? How do we make sense of the fact that for others it's really important for them, and then for many others it's actually not that important relative to other things? So Angela Lee, who's a PhD student here at Stanford, came up with a notion from psychology, which is called mindsets. And you may have heard of this idea. The most famous is around intelligence. Like, you can have a growth mindset where you can grow your intelligence through work. The other is static. I'm endowed with some at birth, and so you're kind of scared about testing it because you don't want to find out you have low. And so it leads to different ways in which people study. A lot of meta-analyses have come out recently suggesting, in an important way for us, that the people on the margins, on the edges there, mindsets can be really important in intelligence. So Angela has adapted that to the idea of technology, and that we have this relationship to technology. And she found that there are really two important dimensions of the mindset that people have around social media. One, I think, is the most important, is what she calls agency. That's the degree to which you feel like you're in control of this thing. You can use it to accomplish your goals. And the flip side of that, of course, is addiction, in which you feel that you're being used, you don't have control. The value of this thing is for someone else. And the other dimension is valence. Do you think ultimately this thing is good for you and helps you accomplish the things that you want to do? Is it overall beneficial, or is it harmful? And one of the difficult things in this space is to hear young people talk about that sense of being addicted, and parents talking about their kids as addicted. And it's really important. This is, I think, the key thing. And I think the addiction framing, and especially for the kids that are feeling addicted, or for the parents that believe their kids are addicted, it can be really problematic. If we believe that we're addicted to social media and we feel that, right? That's what mindsets are. They're really powerful, not just feelings, but experience. It's a lens for how you're looking at the world. It leads to pretty bad outcomes. Obviously that's what's led the person to feel that way. But if you feel addicted, and if that's your mindset, then whenever you have to use it, and we've kind of created a world in which it's important for a lot of things, not just from social, but also for school, for work. If you want to become somebody that's influential or doing things in media, social media is not an option, something you need to be able to do. So if you have that addicted mindset, then when you use social media, you do anything with it, you're like, okay, I feel bad because I just used it. It's bad for me. I don't have control, and I used it. So therefore, I must also feel bad about myself. I must be harming myself. And if we can shift that mindset to one where people can feel like they actually have control, and it's not just about your thinking and you can't magic this away, but if you actually can get people to develop skill sets where they feel that they're in control and have agency, what Angela's work shows is that it leads to all kinds of positive well-being outcomes. And there's two main psychological routes that she's identifying. First is you actually change your behavior. You use social media in ways that are better for you, healthier for you. Use them to do things that help you accomplish those goals, like staying connected. And you do less of what doesn't feel good, like say looking at that one person that you kind of really feel sad that you're not as great about. It also allows you to use it in healthy ways. So not having it in the bedroom at night, so it's not disrupting your sleep, those kind of things. And so there's ways in which we can help people at the regulatory side of things, understanding how the benefits and harms work and making platforms accountable so that it improves their experience. And there's also ways in which we can teach young people, maybe all of us, to use it in ways that are more beneficial for us and making us agents of social media rather than, say, victims. So that's my Saturday morning summary. Thank you all for listening. And Saahil, I'll turn it over to you for questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Oh, that was so insightful. I learned so much about the research, the importance of more policy. I especially appreciate your point on more literacy courses to really empower young people. I think that's
Right.
such a great idea that's so tangible that we can implement today if we needed to. Uh,
Right.
One of your points I want to ask you a question about, and that is the heterogeneity and just complexities of social media's impact. I think that's absolutely true, and the research often can be mixed on, especially on such a complex social issue. I wanted to ask you how you think, obviously, you're so involved in White House policy and just governmental, just work around technology. How do you think about driving policy when we have mixed or, in some cases, unclear evidence around social media's impact?
Yeah, this is the sort of like giant question on everybody's mind. And um, I can understand why we need policies to help out here, right? So first of all, um, these social media companies, the platforms need to be accountable for harms that are caused and for producing a product that can be beneficial rather than harmful. So that's important. The other is that, parents and kids are demanding some help and some change. And so the policies that I worry a little bit about are the ones that assume that the evidence is sort of understood and that it's harmful and is recommending abstinence type goals. And we know that abstinence programs work really well, right? Like when you had prohibition around alcohol back in the last century, that worked really great. And when you tell young people not to have sex or to do drugs, that works really great, right? We know that. So I'm obviously being sarcastic here. Those programs just do not work. Right? And there's like years and years, decades of research showing that this doesn't work. And some of our early policy things that are coming up through Congress are following along this line. And so how do we help them create policies that do this optimization thing, which is like get the benefits and reduce the harms? And so I do like thinking of the metaphor of cars. Cars are incredibly unhealthy for us as a population. There's over 40,000 Americans killed every year by using cars. And so we haven't banned cars. Instead, what we've done is made them increasingly and increasingly more safe through technology, right? So now there's anti-lock brakes. The car dings at me when I don't put my seatbelt on. Back when I was a kid, nobody wore seatbelts. But it also social and behavioral change. So when I was a kid as well, my parents both smoked in the car. It sucked. Let me tell you, as a kid, it was the worst, right? But it was just the norm at the time. And now, you never see people with kids in their car smoking. So we've done legal change, regulatory change, technological change, and social change. When my dad got his license, he would go to the DMV, show that he was 16, do a multiple choice test, and away he goes. He can drive. That was back in the 60s. When I got my license, I had 30 days of driving with my dad before I was free to go. And now in California, there's like over a year of driving where you have, parent in the car, then driving where you can't have any other kids in the car. Right. And so we've just made these changes where we understand how dangerous and powerful and yet important this tool, the car, is. And I think we need the same kind of all hands approach to this. So I think that if we can take that kind of a metaphor rather than it's like a drug or it's like cigarettes, it'll be much more effective and useful than sort of these kind of abstinence approaches.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. I see we're at 9:30. I think that means it's time for Dr. Moreno. Thank you so much, Professor Hancock, and the mic is yours, Jacqueline, for the introduction.
Okay, perfect. All right. Thank you so much, Jeff Hancock. Thank you so much. Good morning, everyone. I'm Jacqueline, and I have the pleasure of introducing Dr. Megan Moreno. Dr. Moreno is a professor, pediatrician, and interim chair at the Department of Pediatrics at the University of Wisconsin School of Medicine. Nationally, she is the co-medical director of the American Academy of Pediatrics Center of Excellence on Social Media and Youth Mental Health. She has devoted her time to researching the impact of social media on the minds and lives of teens, and has received numerous awards, including an AAP Council of Communications and Media's Holkroyd Sherry Award for Career Achievement. Thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Moreno. Take it away.
Thank you so much, and thanks for the invitation. I am going to share some slides. I'm kind of a visual learner and visual person, so I'm excited to share some images during our discussion points today. So I'm excited to talk a little bit around framing around some of the evidence around benefits and risks. And I'm going to assume that for this audience, you all have seen these lists. So I really want to lean into some of the evidence and how that evidence is important in the lists of benefits and risks. I want to build on some of the comments that Professor Hancock shared around where are we now with what kind of narrative we are having about social media, and then think about where we could go and how we could ground our narrative in the evidence and in a solution-focused manner, and then thinking a little bit about better tools and better design. So I know you all have seen lists of the benefits and risks for social media. We know that for benefits, there's evidence demonstrating that social media can help with social connection. It can connect families who live far away from each other. It can connect kids from specific groups. And when you don't have offline connections in your community, you can use social media to build those. It can help with learning, not just new information, but new perspectives. It can allow for creative expression because we know that social media is a place where you can act as not just a consumer of content, but as a creator. It gives opportunities for civic engagement and for identity exploration and identity development. And on the risk side, there's evidence around social media contributing to social comparison or fear of missing out. There is evidence around the potential for negative body image or exacerbating body image concerns. There's data around problematic use of social media, similar to other problematic use of other tech areas, such as video games or online shopping are two other areas of problematic use, and social media problematic use has some similarities. There's risks of being exposed to disturbing or inaccurate content. There's risks of negative interactions with others around bullying, harassment, or exposure to hate speech. And there's definitely risks around predation. And so one of the metaphors that I've often seen over my time in this space is to really try to step back and think about social media as a tool that's neither inherently good nor bad, but that there's context and individual individual factors that determine what you get out of your use of that tool. And so a common metaphor is it's kind of like a hammer. With a hammer, you can build a house. You can also do a lot of damage to yourself or to others. And one thing to think about is similar to a hammer was designed for use by adults. It's got pokey things, it's heavy, it's not always easy to handle. And social media really was designed for adults and wasn't designed with design elements and safeguards for youth. So one other thing to think about when you see these lists of benefits and risks is that a really fascinating aspect of social media is that many of the evidence-based benefits truly align with tasks of adolescent development. So we know that at every age throughout a person's life, there are certain tasks that are associated with that time period for your development. And what's a source of fascination for me is how closely many of the functionalities of social media align with developmental tasks of adolescence. Things like peer connection, developing independence, taking some risks, and developing one's own identity. So it's really a tool that in some ways does have design elements that really match with adolescent development. Another key thing that I want to point out is on this list of risks, all of these risks exist in other aspects of adolescents' online and offline lives. And one other thing that's fascinating to me is that many of these risks are risks that have come up if you go back 20 years, 40 years, 60 years, and look at studies of media from the past. These risks come up in those studies as well. And one of my favorites is recently I was fortunate to go to the American History Museum and the Smithsonian in Washington, D.C., and they have an exhibit about a series of paperback books that was banned in the 1940s and 1950s because it promoted drag racing. And they thought that that form of media would be so persuasive that every teen in America would start drag racing. So they tried to pull all these paperbacks off the shelves. So these are risks around influence and social comparison and FOMO. These have come up in paperback books. These have come up in magazines. There's studies of 17 magazine and its impact on body image. This has come up in television. There were studies of MTV's Real World and its impact on social comparison. So we've been talking about this for a long time, which doesn't mean it's not a real risk, but it also means it's not special or unique or new for social media. So where are we now when we think about the current evidence and the narrative around the evidence? And I'll start with the narrative. So this is a slide that shows some elements of the popular narrative and how it is portrayed. A lot of it is portrayed through news media. One joke I have about this slide is that 2 out of those 3 are real headlines and one of them is satire, but it's a little hard to tell at first glance which one's satire because the news media is so incredibly inflammatory in really hyping up these risks and really promoting this as something that's unbelievably dangerous to everyone. And as Jeff mentioned in his talk, what is the impact of that narrative? We hear about the impact of that narrative in our research studies. I hear it in clinic when we talk to youth about their social media use. We hear the term of bad, referring to yourself as bad, referring to yourself as addicted. And as Professor Hancock mentioned, this is not a narrative that helps people feel a sense of agency or independence or strength. So my worry as a pediatrician is that the news media narrative is really leading to diminishing adolescents' ability to navigate this space. So one really quick story I want to share is that I had a patient who was incredibly interested in climate change and became really interested and invested in being part of the narrative around climate change, was interested in learning and connecting across the globe. And most of his work in that area was on social media. He developed a network, he enrolled himself in webinars, he was part of civic engagement. And the message that he heard is, you're addicted to social media. We're going to take your social media away. And so the question that I ask myself is this a child who was having trouble with social media, or is this a child who was incredibly invested in a particular area? And that's really what the root cause was. So I think this is another place where we really need to ask ourselves, what is social media? It's not the same thing to every person. And taking away social media is very rarely the answer when a kid is struggling. So I want to come back also to the current state of the evidence that Professor Hancock and that the wonderful National Academy's consensus report really illustrated, is that we all need to have a shared understanding that there is not a causal relationship. And this graph here shows examples of what it looks like to have little or no correlation. And one of the ways that I think about this consensus statement, this evidence-based statement, is that what we really know is that there is no evidence for a significant causal relationship that's clinically significant at the population level. That doesn't mean that I haven't taken care of patients who have really struggled with their social media use. That doesn't mean that you all don't know folks who struggle, but it means that at the population level, it's not like an infectious agent where you come close to it and you're going to get infected. There's just not that evidence. One example study that I like to think about is this study from 2017. It's a very large study that was done across the UK. They looked at social media use, and they also looked at a variety of other health behaviors, including asking how many potatoes you ate a week. And what they found is that there was no association between mental well-being and moderate use of digital technology, and measurable, statistically significant, but small negative associations for people with high level of engagement. But even at that high level, the effect size was similar to people who ate very, very high levels of potatoes in a given week. And so it's really important for us to think about not just whether or not the relationship is statistically significant, but what's the level of effect size of that relationship. And in some case, it may be small potatoes. Another thing that I like to think about is the studies of studies. So a meta-analysis is a type of study where you take data from dozens and dozens of other studies and put it together in a big, big, big pot so that you can understand it on a much larger scale. And in this 2020 meta-analyses, they looked at data over a 5-year period, and they also concluded that most research has been correlational, used poor measurements, and led to a mix of conflicting results. So one thing that I like is their conclusion statement that most recent and rigorous studies report small associations that don't distinguish between cause and effect and are unlikely to be of clinical or practical significance. So I think this is that kind of phrase that you can kind of keep in your pocket and be aware of, that again, at the population level, there's these small associations, but individual experiences might be different. So what do we know from the evidence? We know that the popular narrative is one of fear. Fear drives clickbait in the news. Fear sells books, as Professor Hancock alluded to. There's a new book out about that's really fear-based, and it's selling a lot because fear sells. But the evidence doesn't support a causal link between social media and youth mental health. And for my role as a pediatrician and researcher, and our role within the American Academy of Pediatrics, we're really leaning into a focus on teens rather than a focus on screens. So in moving towards a new narrative that is focused more on teens rather than screens, we've been really interested in moving away from the pediatrician's old recommendation of you can do whatever you want, just don't do it two hours a day or more, and leaning more into a model of what we're starting to call the 5 C's. So it's listed here, the first being child. What is that individual's set of strengths, vulnerabilities, risks, peer network, what are they bringing to their interactions with social media? The second C is content. What type of content are you leaning into that can make a huge difference in how you feel and what you experience? What is media crowding out? If media is getting in the way of sleep, if it's getting in the way of getting your homework done, if it's getting in the way of face-to-face interactions that you value, then that's something to attend to. The fourth C is calm. We know that many of us of all ages can lean into social media as a way to calm or distract yourself, but making sure that you've got a more robust toolbox to help yourself get to that place of calm when you need to. And then last C, probably the most important, is communication, making sure that you're communicating with the people that you care about what sort of experiences you're having, how you're processing them, what you're learning, how you want to set up guidance around when you want to be using your social media, when you don't. And that communication is really critical to what sort of well-being or adverse well-being outcomes you'll have. So we're really interested in a better understanding of what teens bring to their digital media experiences and how it impacts what they get out of those experiences. So really leaning into a narrative that is strengths-based, that recognizes individual differences, that supports normal developmental processes, and acknowledges there are some issues with the design of platforms, but not leaning into the narrative that there's issues with teens themselves. I'm also really interested in thinking about family media use patterns. We know that more than 75% of adults use social media. So what are adults role modeling? How are they being able to separate their time online and offline? What sort of family guidelines are present in the home so that everyone is being respectful of time together? And what sort of communication are parents role modeling? So a couple new tools I wanted to bring to this group. First is within the American Academy of Pediatrics, within our Center of Excellence. One of my favorite parts of our work is that we run a Q&A portal. And within this portal, we take questions from anyone who has a question for us. So the vast majority of questions have come from educators so far. We've also had a lot of questions from pediatricians, nurse practitioners, nurses, health providers. We've had questions from parents, and we've had questions from adolescents themselves. So we would absolutely love to take your question. And what we do with those questions is we do a review of the evidence and be able to provide an evidence-based answer. And we also post all the questions on the site so that you can look through previous questions. I'll also remind you all of the AAP's Family Media Plan. This is an online portal. It got a refresh in 2021 to make it more user-friendly, and it provides lists and rationale and evidence around different options for family media guidelines that you can consider, and you can fill it in for each member of the family. You can go back and update it, and it's really meant to be used as a conversation tool and as an accountability tool that families can use over time. I think the last part is thinking about how we as pediatricians, as this youth-based community, as other academics in this area, how we can advocate for better design. As pediatricians, we absolutely recognize we can't do it all. We're not at home with families addressing in-the-moment issues. We hear from parents that they can't do it all, that every platform's settings and guidance and safety is different. It's very confusing to navigate. And we know that we can't lean on teens to do it all. We can't lean on you to be able to protect yourselves when platforms have design elements that are often in conflict with your own needs and interests. I think many of you know that right now there's a lot of legislation that's being proposed, and there's some pretty lousy ones out there and there's some great ones out there. And so thinking about digital design, safety, and privacy are really, really important, and that regulation really is needed to require companies to make some meaningful changes. And I was really excited with my co-medical director for the AAP, Jenny Radesky. We put a piece in the conversation outlining some of the elements of proposed legislation and ways that those might advance or hinder adolescent health. I'll leave us with this thought that comes from Dr. Candace Odgers around the relationship between social media and mental health. And she wrote that two things can be independently true about social media. First, that there is no evidence that using these platforms is rewiring children's brains or driving an epidemic of mental illness. But that second, that considerable reforms to platforms are required given how much time young people spend on them. So that's my parting thought. Thank you so much for being here today and for the opportunity to speak with you. And I'll stop sharing so we can do some questions.
Thank you so much. Sorry. Thank you so much, Dr. Moreno. I really appreciate hearing all of that. We have a quick question from the chat here, which I find extremely interesting, is that while the research that we currently have is inadequate to provide with statistical validity for how much social media is affecting the rewiring in the minds of teenagers, can the anecdotal data that we have from many teens across the globe provide us with a starting point for more research being done and a more conclusive ending point?
That's a great question. I think that's kind of where we are. I think that there is good evidence around anecdotes and qualitative experiences of teens that is driving investigation into both risks as well as the benefits. So a lot of the research around the benefits also came from anecdotal stories from teens that turned into qualitative studies that turned into larger studies. So I do think that those perspectives are being taken into consideration.
Thank you. Another question we have is, you talked a lot about different experiences playing a role in how much teens were affected and how their different livelihoods and possibly where they live, where they go to school, all of that affects their relationship with social media. Is there a particular age group, a particular demographic that is affected more than others? And if so, why are they affected more?
That's a great question. I hesitate even to bucket people into demographics because even within a given demographic, whether that is a racial or ethnic group, whether that's a geographic location, the variation of individual teens in that group can be so different. And you can even imagine, a teen with a really strong social support and family connections. And if they have a negative experience on social media, they may interpret it in very different ways than a teen who's very isolated, doesn't have strong connections, doesn't have a lot of support. So even within those groups, the individual experience can be so varied.
Totally makes sense. Can I ask one final question, which is, oh, I had it right here. Let me find it again. Yeah. Part of your work is as a pediatrician. Obviously, you do so much, and I was really curious, when you're talking with other pediatricians about social media and well-being, do you feel like there's a more consistent narrative than there is among the research world, or does it still really vary?
That's a great question. I think there is some variation, and I think there's some there was this 2-hour rule for so long in pediatrics, and I think that rule was very simple in the context of a clinic visits. If you think about it, pediatricians have so much to cover. They need to cover your medications and your health history and your family history, and are you wearing a seatbelt, and are you wearing a helmet, and are you wearing sunscreen, and what are you eating, and how are you feeling? And so media is just one sliver of all the things that make up your health. And back in the days where pediatricians could say, are you doing 2 hours a day or less? And if you said yes, they could move on to the next thing. But now it's nuanced and complicated. And so I think there has been some pushback from pediatricians because of the time limitations they have. And so that's one role that we see ourselves as the center, is we need to find some tools that pediatricians can use easily and quickly in the context of all the other things they need to cover.
Mm-hmm. Wow, thank you for always delving in that complexity and doing the important work for us so that even when there's a million things going on, we can together understand what's the impact of social media in our generation. Thank you so much for doing that important work. With that, I think it is time for us to share a little video. I can share a little bit about it. Again, thank you so much, Dr. Moreno. So inspiring. One thing we at Unwiring have been thinking a lot about is how can we better engage young people and find solutions when we do have these social media struggles. And so much of it's on the interpersonal level. Another level that we've been trying to grapple with is on the actual platform redesigning the tools we use type level. And so in the fall of 2023, we launched a redesign challenge. And here's a short video highlighting some of what we heard. Okay.
As young people, we are the subjects of an unprecedented social media experiment.
We are both enjoying its benefits and deeply feeling its harms.
The issues are really serious, impacting the well-being of our whole generation.
Mental health,
Addiction,
loneliness,
polarization.
misinformation.
We must get involved in co-creating a better future.
That's why we launched the Unwiring Social Media Redesign Challenge.
We reached out to students at over 7,500 U.S. high schools.
And we asked them,
What is the change you wish to see in social media to promote a healthier user experience?
and here's a glimpse into what we heard.
If we can teach AI things like facial recognition, cybersecurity, and data analysis, then surely we can use it to verify facts and information. Let's push for a button or visual that highlights verified information, or ways to upvote quality pieces of content.
Once a day, there's a 20-minute period where the app kind of just shuts down and allows users to take a break, because I know personally how hard it can be to get off the constant loop of new videos.
Social media platforms should explore alternative models that prioritize user well-being over endless scrolling. Perhaps a subscription-based approach where users pay for premium, ad-free experiences. That could reduce the pressure on platforms to maximize user screen time at the expense of mental health.
They can show videos encouraging them to go to sleep if it's like 12 o'clock at night and they're still scrolling away. And then another thing that they can do is give users the option to filter out posts based on what they like and what they don't like.
It's very easy for people to lie about their age. Something verifying your age to make sure that you really are how old you're saying you are, I think that could make a really large difference.
Creating a word bank, storing profanities, including their translations in other languages.
TikTok actually should put videos in their TikToks that say, this is bad, you guys need to take a break. Similar to how cigarettes do with their lung cancer ads, but not to that extent.
And a solution to the overly stimulated mind due to the Reels feature, slowly decrease the time limit of their access to Reels and social media and not have them go through withdrawals.
It is called 2 is Better Than 1, or Tobo. Tobo is a new type of profile. All participants have access to the account, but none can post individually. They must get together in person within 10 feet of each other to allow posting.
I believe the best way to do this is to combine the external regulation and the business model leverage points by using governmental regulation to change the business model away from ad revenue.
And then on that homepage, I think there should be categories to set an intention of what you're looking for. Because a lot of times I'll open YouTube and then I'll be just scrolling trying to find something and I'll completely forget what I was looking for and end up just getting distracted for hours.
The best ways to mitigate the effects of TikTok's addictive features would be by requiring transparency regarding TikTok's algorithm. TikTok should disclose how their algorithm curates personal content and keeps people watching so the users know what they're getting into.
And I think that all starts with the comment section. As a consumer and a creator, I think that the comment section needs some serious changes. As of right now, there's only 2 options for comments. You either have them on or you have them off. That needs to change. Once someone gets reported on one of their comments, they should be withheld from commenting for a select amount of time. And if this offense is repeated again, then they should completely lose their commenting feature.
It's more customization of the layout, less predatory data collection by social media companies, and better transparency of where that data is used.
I would like to propose that Instagram create a feature that allows for its users to vote on reporting specific comments.
They all were designed to keep us connected and promote friendship and relationships, but I don't think there was a time I ever felt more alone. However, I do think that social media can change, and instead of making us feel at our worst, it can make us feel great.
All right. I hope you enjoyed a little glimpse into the redesign challenge. And now it's time for one segment I have been looking forward to for ages. Quickly before then, I'm going to announce our winners. Thank you to all the wonderful participants who submitted their ideas. And in particular, we'd like to highlight 9 folks who had just incredibly brilliant ideas. Congratulations to our bronze innovators, Eileen Glander, Maggie Gu, and Harper Roberts. Congratulations to our silver tech activists, Meisha Lou Rademacher, Colette Fort, and Andrew Schneider. And finally, congratulations to our gold change makers, Jennifer Herrera, Eileen Moreno, and Annabelle Tornillo. Thank you all so much. And with that, it is time for our panel. Sarek and Aidan Baird, would you like to give us a little introduction?
Yeah. Hello, everyone. I'm Sarek, and I have the pleasure to introduce Aidan Kohn-Murphy. Aidan is the founder and senior advisor of Gen Z for Change, an organization of over 500 social media creators fighting for social justice. They have gathered over 500 million combined followers and work closely with the White House, Dr. Anthony Fauci, their International Refugee Assistance Project, and many more. He's been awarded Forbes' 30 Under 30 class of 2023, and he's managed to juggle all of it while attending Harvard University.
Cool. Thank you, Sarek. I'm also Aidan, albeit the less popular one, and I'm honored to introduce Emma Lembke. Emma is the founder of the Log Off movement, an international group of youth dedicated to rethinking social media's effect on teenagers. She's also the co-chair of Design It For Us and co-founder of Technically Politics, which is a youth lobbying campaign dedicated to pushing forth big tech regulation. Emma has testified before Congress and has been featured in numerous media outlets, including the New York Times, CBS, Bloomberg, and many others. On top of all that, she is currently a student at Washington University in St. Louis. All right, Saahil, handing it over to you.
All right. I am so thrilled and honored to moderate this panel with both of you. Emma and Aidan, I'm not sure if you know this, probably don't, but you two have inspired me since the beginning with Unwiring. Your work is just so impactful. It's been a guide to me, the team, and really just how young people can have a real impact on such complex social issues. So first, thank you. And I'm really excited for this conversation. To kick us off, can you both share and give our group a sense as to what's this incredible work that both you and your organizations are trying to, just what you all are trying to change in the world today? Feel free to start.
Totally, I can jump in. And first, I just want to say thank you so much for the incredibly kind words and for having me here. It's been so interesting to watch programming so far. And it's what you guys are doing is so important. And thank you to the 67 people who came out again on a Saturday. For most people, as I understand, morning. For me, afternoon. But I woke up as only very recently, so I get kind of a morning for me. So I am the founder of an organization called Gen Z for Change. We're really focused on using social media to engage, educate, and empower young people, and help them realize that they can give them actions that they can take to make a tangible difference in their community, to kind of take the like Instagram infographic to tangible action, whether that be sending in, we develop all these digital tools that young people can use to send in false tips to an anti-choice tip line in Texas, or anti-critical race theory tip line in Virginia. or send in false job applications to companies that are trying to hire who fire workers for unionizing and then try to replace them with what they're called scabs. And these are just some of the tools that we kind of think like this is how an easy, accessible way that young people can get started. And from there, it's kind of what's next. It's calling your member of Congress, maybe volunteering with a local advocacy organization, working, really leading a protest, kind of all the way up. And yeah, we're focused on a very wide range of issues. And we're also a member of the Design It For Us coalition, very, very proudly. And yeah, that's a brief overview. Emma.
That sounds amazing. I love how you all are just a brilliant example of using social media to catalyze this good in the world. Thank you. Thank you for the work you do. Emma.
Absolutely. And I just want to state again, super grateful to be here on a Saturday. Also, Aidan is a good friend of mine, so I'm always thankful to share the Zoom spotlight with him. So hello, everyone. Just wanted to say my name again. I'm Emma Lembke. I'm currently in my apartment here at Washington University in St. Louis. But when I'm not doing or trying to complete my major as a poli-sci student, I'm working as the founder and executive director of the Log Off movement and working with the Design It For Us coalition. So initially kind of getting into the space, I was propelled through my own negative experience with social media, but the Log Off movement, kind of the work that we do is really intended to capture kind of what Aidan was touching upon, that nuance that is like implicitly just born out of social media. This understanding that, social media is not all bad, it's not all good, it's incredibly multifaceted. So how can we really leverage its exploration, its expression, its connection, everything that it can do for us in a really positive way through activism. So what Log Off has really done is it's looking at how to critically engage with social media in a way that is mutualistic rather than parasitic for the users, a way that we can center young people in our own youth movement, and we can really feel as though we're gaining power back. So we've engaged with, Gen Z for Change in the past. We're huge fans because we think that that's such a beautiful way to show that you can use social media for good. And again, a beautiful way of rethinking how we really engage critically. So we allow young people to engage in their own, mental journey and their own technological journey by giving them campaigns. We have some advocacy campaigns like Forks Up, Phones Down, that's really looking to prioritize in-person connection. And then we have everything all the way to like our blog and our podcast, again, just leveraging as many young people to tell their stories and to push forth for positive change. And then for Design It For Us, that is a really cool youth-led coalition that was born out of all of our work, Gen Z for Change, Log Off, we have Encode Justice, just to name a few, of some really, really powerful young people in the space who were demanding change, but wanted to do so with a megaphone rather than just being siloed off in our own little universe. So Design It For Us was a way that we wanted to combine all of our efforts to push forth on key policy points, and to just have like a touch point with a ton of different orgs and youth activists to kind of discuss issues, engage critically, and feel as though our voice is being heard. And we've done, I think, a phenomenal job just in the past year. We've been able to go have lobby days or weeks of actions on the Hill. We've spoken with many lawmakers, and we've seen actually 2 of our members testify in front of either the Senate or the House. So we're really proud of our membership and their kind of drive to collectively work to push forth key policy points to protect kids online.
Can we please talk more about that? I need to hear more about your work speaking in front of Congress. Obviously, that is so unique. Could you talk more about what it was like to speak in front of Congress and what it meant to be in this political ecosystem surrounding social media?
Absolutely. Well, it was very scary. I will definitely admit that. So I was called last February on Valentine's Day to go speak in front of the Senate Judiciary Committee. I was called specifically to tell my own story because a lot of my work and my advocacy has been centered around the idea that there is a missing puzzle piece in the digital well-being and advocacy space, saying that, young people's mental health is being harmed, it's being jeopardized because we're not being centered in the creation of technology. And we see that through the, rise of mental health issues. We also see that through so many individuals voicing their concerns, their negative experiences. But even if those voices are out there, they're not being heard. And I kind of pushed very hard in the media that young people were not being given a spot at the table. And all of a sudden, a spot at the table emerged and appeared. So it was an incredibly formative period and moment in my life where it felt as though young people were not only being, given a spot at the table, but were actually being listened to. And I think that that was apparent not only in the responses and critical questions that were asked of me once I told my story, but also the effect afterwards. Lawmakers reached out to design it for us, to have us critically engage with bills. They reached out to us to get our feedback. So I think that it was a turning point, not just for me and for the work that I do, but in the space in general, where we finally were not just being, given a spot at the table, but we were picked up into the conversation as a active member rather than passive participant.
That is so, so inspiring. When you are at this table now, can you describe more about what that difference looks and feels like, and maybe continue going into the work on policy that you've done recently afterwards?
Yeah, and then I know Aidan's gonna have a lot of things to say about this too, because I know he's been engaged. It's a very unique shift. So when young people are given a spot at the table, I feel like we all can understand this. Our solutions become more viable and they are much more well-rounded. So what I have seen is lawmakers reaching out to us and saying, especially after being given a spot at the table to testify, they've reached out to us and asked really great critical questions like, what are design features that you think are most harmful to young people? How would a young person be affected if this were to be banned? Questions like that are really getting at the root question, which is how do we design online spaces to be safer for young people when they enter, not just by putting forth a complete ban. We've been able to engage at that level, which is a very critical level. It allows for young people to tell their experiences, and it allows for us to be experts on our own story. So by adding that expertise, you get better solutions, and you see lawmakers begin to have a deeper understanding of the issue at hand. And as we kind of move forward, what that's looked like is we've just continued to apply pressure and lobbying for key policy, both at the state level through like age-appropriate design codes, to the federal level, looking at like the Kids Online Safety Act and some other bills. But we've worked really, really hard to just drive home that young people need to have technology designed for them rather than having technology designed and then young people be an afterthought. We are not an afterthought. We need to be a forethought. We need to be at the front of these designers' brains when they are figuring out how they are going to design tech for us. So we've pushed really hard, and we're really excited to see where we're going in the future because we see a huge shift in momentum in the space at large.
Thank you, Emma, and thank you for bringing the youth voice to the table. Aidan, can you talk also about, obviously at Gen Z for Change, you all do so much work with our political system. How have you found a way to, through politics, drive change?
Yeah, I think that it's gotten. I think that I mean, there's no surprise to I think anyways, but most adults are not like, I mean, older adults are not super used to like working with young people as direct collaborators. And I think that sometimes there can be a very weird power dynamic where like there have been times where like I remember this one time where I approached a lawmaker to just I saw in an airport to talk to them about some bill I knew was coming up, and they were like, "Oh, do you want to take a picture?" And I'm like, "No, I want to I want to talk to you about this legislation," and I think that like. It's really about identifying who your allies are, because there are a lot of members of Congress, not enough, but a lot of members of Congress who are really champions for have championed and uplifted youth voices and really like and worked with young people rather than just like, I don't know, like assuming what a young person might want, or really going on what like commentators on young people are saying. I think that you have like, I mean, last month we unveiled a youth policy agenda on Capitol Hill with Sunrise, the Sunrise Movement, March for Our Lives, United We Dream, and we had a number of members of Congress, including Bernie Sanders, Summer Lee, Jamal Bowman, Ro Khanna, who those are just a few of the people who have been like excited and ready to work with young people because they understand that young people are. It is important to listen. One, it is important to listen and work with all constituencies, and also there's a recognition that young people actually have oftentimes a very good, if not better than an older generation, understanding of how to address some of the issues that are facing young people most. I think that you see, like, I don't know if I'm sure everyone here has seen some clip from when tech CEOs testify in front of Congress, and you see members of Congress ask about whether it's banning Finsta, or they ask about if TikTok connects to your Wi-Fi. These are the people who are making the legislation, and that's not great because they clearly do not understand it. And so it's really important to kind of get your voice in there, and sometimes they're not going to want to hear it. That's definitely absolutely something that we've experienced. Sometimes you're going to get like pushback, but that's like kind of the only way to really break in to the system.
Absolutely. This is, I mean, I don't know so many young people that regularly talk with legislators and Congress members, especially in an airport. That's so funny. I'm still wondering how that happened. When you're
I'm from DC, so it's kind of
okay.
They're always around.
So whether you're in the airport in Washington DC, what do these conversations, if you wanted to give us like a look into these conversations, what do they feel like, and what do you bring up to them when you first begin talking?
I mean, if it's a member I've talked to you before, I kind of just, I don't know, like the pleasantries, and then going into really the issue that I'm focused on. If it's not a member that I'm super familiar with, or someone who we've never Gen Z for Change has never worked with, then I'll kind of explain who we are, the kind of work that we do, and then like expressing in a like direct and non-apologetic way, an unapologetic way, because I think a lot of people, myself included, are kind of prone to like I don't want to bother you, or like I don't want to impose. And of course, like, sure, if they're like, if a lawmaker or anyone is having dinner with their family, that's probably not the time. But like, if they are in public, I think it is absolutely appropriate to go up to them. That they work for the people, and raising whatever concerns that you have with a clear, direct ask. Gen Z for Change has done a lot of lobbying work around pushing members of Congress to call for a ceasefire in Gaza, and stop sending unconditional aid to Israel. That's something that we've been really focused on recently. And also, I don't know. I think just trying to like figure out what's the in, if that makes sense, where like if you know that this member is from a district that has a lot of I'm trying to think of just some example that is really struggling with education, like with education policy, kind of making a tie-in, whatever, because all of these issues are interconnected, interrelated, and kind of making the tie-in to their constituency, because that really does, I don't know, does matter. Yeah, that's what I would say. Emma, what about you? What's been your experience?
I completely agree. I think that you just want to be as like persuasive as possible, with an understanding, like what Aidan had said. You're a young person, and already there might be an understanding, or there might be an assumption that you might not know as much as you really do. So going in strong and confident and towing the line is really important. So for me, what I always do, and what I was told in this outstanding class I took called Just Do It, running for political office and lobbying, is you want to be the most knowledgeable person in that conversation as it pertains to the topic you care about, without it coming off that you are the most knowledgeable person on that topic. You don't want to be overtly confident, but you want to make it very clear that you've got a call to action. This is something that needs to be done. Here are certain solutions. And you don't really want to, I try not to like make them into a villain, because you want to work with them. It's a constructive conversation. It's not you yelling at them. And I think Aidan put it really well too. Like you don't want to go up to them and like when they're eating, or you want to know kind of the right area, but also at the same time, that is their job. Like their job is to listen to you. You are like, they are representing you, even if you're not their direct constituent. They are a member of the United States, like workforce, honestly. And they are here to listen to what you need. But again, tying it into something that they really care about could be the perfect leverage point for you to have even more minutes with them. So I think that's really important. I also just think that people underestimate how much they want to talk with you. I found that, like, for instance, when I reached out to my lawmakers, specifically, I'm from Birmingham, Alabama. So when I reached out to my senators, they were ecstatic. They wanted to speak. They wanted to hear what I had to say. Because if you're a young person who's passionate about something, it shows. And young people with passion are really unstoppable, as we all know. So I think that you should just go in with confidence, be knowledgeable, but kind of understand how you can tailor that conversation in a way that's the most constructive and productive and concise.
Thank you. That totally makes sense. On the political level, or we could even take this more broadly. Let's say you had a magic wand with these policymakers, or just in your work more broadly. What is one thing you would implement that would have a disproportionately positive impact on social media, particularly?
I would just like to state that I would love to be in a world where Aidan is president and has a magic wand and can change anything he
And
wants.
vice versa.
Aidan for president.
Aidan for president is what I will stand behind. Aidan, I don't know about you. I think from my perspective, something that's just like, it's so small. It's so small. And I did a lot of work with like the age appropriate design code and pushing this. It's just having higher levels of privacy turned on by default. So for instance, like when you come onto Instagram, or if you enter like, let's say Instagram or YouTube, and scroll isn't on first. You are private by default. I think that a lot of change happens slowly over time, but that's such a simple thing that could really catalyze a great shift in how we view technology and our social media usage, because it's giving you the autonomy to then say, okay, maybe I do want the endless scroll. Maybe I do want to like open myself up more, but you are the one making that decision and not someone else for you. So that's just a micro little design shift that I would love to see implemented, and I think is very viable. But I have larger dreams of breaking more systems, but that's one that I think is pretty tangible.
I would say, I mean, that's so hard. I think, okay, and also we'll say a magic wand transcends constitutionality. We'll say that, for the sake of this. Not that I'm doing anything that's boldly unconstitutional, but just like, I don't know, and I don't know if we're gonna get into interstate commerce clause here, but point being, I think I don't know, breaking up Meta would be up there. I don't know. It's kind of like Lena Khan has the magic wand, right? Like she has the real magic wand right now. But I think also much stricter protections for much stricter regulations on selling user data. I think that's just a big piece, and because it is so interconnected to privacy and like all of these companies are selling. And also, to be clear, I'm not like, I've done like, I know probably 1% of the as much as Emma does about the tech space exactly, like specifically, but like, yeah. So I think probably restrictions on companies selling your data, whether it's like internationally or nationally. Like I don't trust any social media company with my data, and I don't think there's any reason necessarily. They haven't given us any reason to. So I think, yeah, probably that.
Aidan, to jump off on you too, I think that's a really good point too, because it's oftentimes misunderstood how much data is being collected. Like, I don't think that we as a collective society have a deep kind of digital consciousness where we understand how much is being collected on us and where it's going and how it's being sold. And I can't even map it out. But I do think like data brokerage specifically, and looking at like going into the future, if you are pro-choice or something like that, like there are great violations that can be used in selling like health related data, or law enforcement buying data from data brokerages around like Planned Parenthood, like stuff like that. Even if you're not pro-choice, there are great implications of not monitoring or at some point restricting how much data can be sold about you and on you. And again, it comes just back to privacy and autonomy. Do you really want someone else like a Meta to be able to package, sell, and ship out data on you that can then be used to predict your behavior? I'd say that feels like an invasion to me. And I think that, to Aidan's point, it's just something that we should begin to really critically think about going into the future. How can we protect ourselves from unwanted breaches and and violations of our privacy?
And I think you're totally right. It's just so not like and obviously it is purposeful that we aren't super aware of exactly how much our data, how much of our data is being collected. There's a stat that I'm not gonna remember the stat exactly. Emma, maybe you remember it, about Zach from Accountable Tech. It's something about how very loud car. Sorry, about how Google makes like. I know I think it's over 90% of their revenue from data brokerage, which I don't remember the exact stat, but it's like something like that, which blew my mind. It's like, this is like the for a lot of companies, like this is the underlying purpose and what they are, and the service they are offering publicly is actually not like aligned with the actual purpose of the company, which is, I don't know, scary to say the least.
Wow. Okay, so many different ideas, so many different issues that you both touched upon, from data transparency all the way to, you mentioned the Israel conflict that you both are doing work, like you're doing work on with Gen Z for Change. We're living through a really complex time, and between these social issues, social injustice, health injustice, social media and AI, like producing concerning impacts, how do you both maintain hope in the work that you do?
Oh, I'm answering this first because of people like him. Because I think that there are so many young people within Gen Z and younger generations who have kind of finally, they've stood up and said, I'm not going to accept the status quo. I'm going to push and work and think critically to build a new future that I'm proud for my child to grow up in. And I think that you see it with so many Gen Z activists, but you also see it with so many people after us. So in my opinion, the people that give me hope are the individuals who are surrounding me in all of the spaces that I'm in as it relates to advocacy, and the knowledge that the work that they're doing is going to build a better future. And if we all collectively work together, we can kind of shape our digital ecosystem in a way that we're really excited and proud of. And, I said this when I testified, we are the ones who are going to build the next social media. We are the ones who are going to build and shape our next, political environment. So we're starting young, but that means we're going to be seasoned when we get to that point. And, I just think that we are all really passionate and we understand the breadth and the depth of the issue that we're facing, but we're really able and willing to attack it because we're starting out, we're using our personal experiences and propelling ourselves forward through collective action. So short answer, Aidan, obviously, but bigger answer, it's just all the other activists in the space who are working hard and creating orgs to fix this solution or to find a solution.
I think Emma answered first because she knew I was going to say her. But I think that, like, in large part, I think the fact that there are just so many young people in this space around any issue like that you can imagine, who are like fully dedicated to this work, often like and often put in many hours of work in a totally volunteer basis, which can be an access barrier. However, the fact that there is this willingness and drive is still in itself inspiring. I think that I think knowing that young people are like, there has never been a generation, and this is like a statistically, and there has not been a generation in American history that has been as diverse, as progressive, as socially aware as Gen Z. And the fact of the matter is, very soon Gen Z is going to have if not a majority, then a plurality of we're going to make up a very, very large percentage of the voters. And soon, and we're already seeing Gen Z members of Congress. Like, Gen Z is coming, and there hasn't been much evidence that Gen Z is getting less progressive or less passionate about social issues as they're getting older. So I think the future is bright, and I also think that we're seeing more and more older people who are approaching young people as collaborators and as peers, and as trying to figure out what they can do to support, rather than take over or try to stymie a youth movement. So I would say intergenerational collaboration, intragenerational collaboration, and I guess I could have just said collaboration in general. But I think that those are two really big things. Yeah, and also just the connection to history, where like so many student movements have deep historical ties. I'm in a class on student activism right now, and I'm doing a final project on this amazing left group on the left, in group called Students for Democratic Society, where from the 60s, where like I've been watching all these videos, and almost all of it seems like you could hear it today. You could hear this about students taking over university buildings, students peacefully demonstrating in these really specific ways. So I think just understanding the historical legacy, and that we're not not alone in this, and that we're really taking up the torch from the leaders who came before us, I think is a really helps combat like isolation or feeling powerless, because you know that there were people before you, there will be people after you.
Mm-hmm. Wow, there's so much there. Learning from the past, doing incredible work in the present. Emma, you mentioned that as we continue moving forward, we'll become even more seasoned activists. You two are definitely vets in this space. You've earned that title. And so for that reason, I want to ask you this final question, which is, what's one piece of wisdom that you in 2024, Aidan or Emma, have acquired that you would give to the 2018 Aidan or Emma?
I mean, there are truly a million things. I think I would say, like, and this should have seemed obvious. I mean, everything seems obvious in retrospect, is that, like, not knowing something or not being able to do something is not like saying I don't know can be a really, really good thing. Like being willing to recognize that, like, there are issues and things that you might be like really knowledgeable on, but there are also gonna be things that you really don't know like anything about, and really going into kind of everything that you're not super experienced in with like a mindset of like, I want to learn from this. What can I like, how can I use this as an experience for growth? I think is really, really helpful, because there are and really recognizing that that collaborate, that like by saying I don't know and working with people who know things that you don't, you are going to be able to expand your collective impact so much more. And so really not just sticking to what you know.
Yeah, 100. I completely agree. I think I would also add to, on the flip side though, when you do know something and you know that you want to take action, don't let, don't let perfection be the enemy of the good. Like acting is always the hardest thing, like getting out, doing something. So for me, looking back, it took me like 3 years to start Log Off, when it could have started the day after I had the idea. So, looking back, just saying to yourself, at a certain point, action is just what is required. And, if you move forward and you don't know at that point, again, not admit defeat, but admit that you don't know, because that's kind of, you've gained power through that, because you can have more collaboration intra and inter generationally. But also just really saying to yourself, if I am passionate about something, I have a dream or I have a vision, I'm going to work hard and act in some way so that I can contribute to building a solution, building a better future. That's always kind of the first and hardest step. So I would have said to myself, just go and ride the wave. And I think that you can see with a lot of activists in this space that those two things that we mentioned are kind of ring true. But again, it seems so obvious looking back, but just let those two, I think, principles guide you, and you will find great success in whatever advocacy work you do.
Mm-hmm. Thank you both so much. You clearly both know so much, and I really appreciate your insight as a young activist, and for all the other young activists who want to like grow into your footsteps as we grow older. So thank you so much for sharing your wisdom with us, and you all will have inspired a new generation of young people. So thank you. With that,
Thank you very much.
thank you. With that, Aksh, would you like to introduce Miss DiResta? Thank you all so much.
Yes, I would love to, and thank you, Aidan and Emma again. You guys are right. The future is bright. Um, with that, I'm thrilled to introduce Miss Renée DiResta. Miss DiResta is the Technical Research Manager at the Stanford Internet Observatory, a cross-disciplinary program of research, teaching, and policy engagement for the study of abuse in current information technologies. She's renowned for investigating AI's role in the 2016 and 2020 elections, and has advised Congress, the State Department, and national organizations on misinformation. She's an ideas contributor at Wired and The Atlantic, and has been featured in numerous media outlets, including the New York Times, the Washington Post, CNN, and even the documentary The Social Dilemma, as well as many others. Ms. DiResta, please take it away.
Hey there, it's great to be here. I am at a standing desk at the moment, so I'm very big in your screen. I made some slides, so why don't I go ahead and share my screen just to kind of guide the conversation. Very excited to chat with you all today. And let's see, all right, there we go. Awesome, let me now, I always lose the part where the play button goes. Here we go. All right. So can everybody see that? Can you guys see that? Great. Awesome. Okay, so I wanted to talk a little bit about generative AI, and that's because we were chatting when Saahil and others were at Stanford a couple weeks ago about what would be something to talk about to kind of explain how we're thinking about it, but also something that you all are familiar with, and probably way more familiar than people 20 years older, but just to think about how it's transforming society and ways we should think about using it ethically and helping other people to understand how this big shift is going to affect them. So I want to say that this is kind of a story of three systems, right? There's the social media landscape, which y'all have been talking about all morning, and I got to hear some of the last couple presentations on that. There's the AI landscape, which is emerging, right? So some of the first deepfake, kind of public awareness of deepfakes really began back in 2018. Actually, that was when some of the videos of President Obama and others speaking began to kind of make the rounds. And so people began to get very concerned about what deepfakes would do to society, what they would do to elections, what they would do to people's sense of reality. But of course, not a whole lot happened. And so I think I want to talk a little bit about why that was and what that means, for us at this inflection point. And then the final system is what I'll just call the great offline, right? The ways that we actually engage with each other in the real world, the ways that we spend time together in person, the ways that we think about how we relate to each other, again, online or offline, but just ways in which these three systems, social media, generative AI, and then just our general social fabric are intersecting. So I want to talk about generative AI in a very particular way, which is as taking the cost of content creation to zero. So that's a phrase, something going to zero, you hear pretty common in venture capital. The cost all of a sudden declines significantly, and that really creates this huge opportunity because now people can do something where there had previously been some kind of limitation on it, right? So it used to be that if you wanted to make a deep fake of President Obama, you had to have access to some kind of specific tools. Those tools were kind of hard to come by. Even as they began to be democratized, there were still some gating functions there. And what we've seen since, particularly over the last year, is essentially just a proliferation of different types of models and different types of services that have made this ability to be a creator of videos, of images, of audio, text, really drop to essentially nothing. So the former barriers to entry, right? That if you wanted to make a video of somebody, you had to have video editing skills. If you wanted to make an image, a photorealistic image of someone doing something, you had to have either really great Photoshop skills or really phenomenal drawing skills. And now you just need the ability to, kind of type some words into a prompt field. So generative AI technology enables each of us to create whatever we can imagine. And so it's the each of us that's actually the important part of the sentence, right? It's that all of a sudden, this power of creation really is in anyone's hands. And that's also a very significant change because again, you used to have the capacity, the kind of cost to produce something, the time required to produce something meant that that kind of access was limited to maybe a certain class of people, right? Some artisans, some governments that had resources, the ability to pay to create certain kinds of content, media people who had the ability to create certain types of content. But now when you drop the cost to zero, anybody can be a player in that ecosystem, that ecosystem of shaping opinions and putting content out into the world. So the power of creation has changed in a whole lot of different ways, right? So there is images probably are the most drastic. I don't know how many people were paying attention to what fake faces looked like in the 2017, 2018 timeframe, which was when we started to see them appearing quite regularly. But you could kind of tell that they were fake, right? The eyes, the nose, and the mouth, that all sat in a particular grid. The teeth were usually pretty bad. The earrings were always kind of wonky. If they even had ears, that was also wonky. The hair would blend into the background. The collars would not be crisp. They didn't, the machines didn't quite understand what a collar was. And so they would just, again, some would blend into the background or it'd be completely asymmetric. So there were ways that you could kind of tell that you were looking at something that was inauthentic, right? Somebody that didn't exist. And some people began to use them in part because they kind of liked the idea of having privacy and anonymity. So you would actually see people using AI-generated faces as their avatars on Twitter or on Facebook, just because they wanted to engage, but they didn't want to engage with their own face or as themselves. It was sort of like a veil and an option for anonymity. One of the things that's really shifted, though, is the sophistication, right? The ability to create images. I picked one that was just the sort of came with, I think, I'll say like maybe Midjourney 6 or something. So I just kind of pulled it from their website. So that's where that image is from. But it was, one of the ways that they were showing off this ability to create something that is, in this particular case, stylized, right? She looks like a video game character. Her face is very perfect. But it is, again, showing that like you can make that by typing, just by creating a prompt. And so the ability to create something that's photorealistic and that's really unique and different, that's not just a, kind of face against a blank background, the way the first generation of what was called at the time GANs generated images, those were used for manipulation, but this is a significant improvement. And again, you can create something phenomenally artistic and very captivating. Then you have text, right? So I use ChatGPT actually fairly regularly. I like it. I like it as a way to think through things. In this particular case, give me some bullets on AI-generated text, right? And it just, you have the sort of immediate production. I know that there's a lot of people in education who are very worried about what young people are doing with it, to what extent you will learn if you can just have it kind of write your stuff for you. But again, it's an incredible tool, and I think that in any of these cases, you have something that can be a tool or a weapon, and so that's one of the things that I'm going to talk about here. Video. This is one of the very first kind of really blew people's minds at the time because of the limitations of this slide here. I had to crop Jordan Peele's face out of it, but at the time you could see the side by side of Jordan Peele talking and President Obama's mouth moving and the words kind of coming out in his voice, right? So again, this capacity to create video and audio, and this is from 2018. So obviously it's not quite so blurry now. It's obviously far more refined. And now again, we've really advanced to the point where you can generate something like this just by typing words, and then the video is generated. So there's not even really a need to do anything particularly sophisticated anymore. So generative AI is everywhere now, right? It's sort of the new normal, at least for people in tech. But it's starting to trickle into industries, and it's too bad we can't. I can't see people here. I'm kind of curious how many people use it regularly themselves. I don't know if this is something that has made its way into the normal everyday use of everybody in Gen Z also, but it is something that we're starting to see really gain adoption. ChatGPT in particular had an absolutely phenomenal adoption curve. It was something that people really saw value in kind of signing up, creating an account, and participating in generative content. So you have democratized access, again, particularly for text and images, but video and audio are well on the way. The technological improvements, the realisticness of the content, the inability to distinguish machine generated versus real has increased significantly across all media types. And then approaches to detection and provenance, which are ways that you'd be able to tell if that's happening. They're gaining attention, but they're still very early. So even as the capacity to create has really exponentially improved, the ability to detect whether something is created has not. And so that's one of these interesting gaps that's beginning to happen. The thing to be very aware of is that even if you are fully aware of how these systems work, it's gotten increasingly difficult to tell if something is produced by AI at this point. The old tells of the fingers or the teeth or the ears really are gone. Those have been fixed in later variants of the models. And so what that means is that the kind of cat and mouse game of figuring out if somebody is trying to use them maliciously is really favoring the offender at this point, the aggressor. And then finally, I think the other point with generative AI to understand is that the open source model community is large and growing, right? And so it's not only the access to the tools through big companies like OpenAI or Midjourney or Google, Facebook, there's much more of an open source model community, and that's particularly where some of the dicier applications are being developed. So unreality is a term that that I and some others have been using to describe the ability to create something that is highly, highly realistic and indistinguishable from reality. We are seeing it, the beautiful artistic stuff is, of course, one use for it. But then there are exploitative uses for it also. And so at SIO, since we study adversarial abuse, we are very interested in these things. Because there's a lot of questions here related to how you should handle this, right? For tech platforms, and also for, as we think about it as creators ourselves, what the norms should be. So political propaganda is one area. I picked this one because this was kind of a interesting controversy. This is a picture that is not real, and there was a series of them that were made of President Trump engaging with African-American people. They weren't made by the campaign, but they were made by fans, right? So again, anybody can do this now. And so you have this interesting dynamic of, okay, well, here's an artistic rendering. And if you disclose it as an artistic rendering, I made this because I really like President Trump, and so here's this image that I've created of him with his, with his adoring fans. That's a perfectly legitimate form of free expression, I think, if you disclose it. But the problem is a lot of these things are immediately either not disclosed or they're decontextualized, right? There was another image that a disinfo researcher actually made of President Trump being arrested. And he disclosed, again, in the images, just messing with Midjourney, here are my pictures kind of thing. But those images were taken and they were clipped and they were moved somewhere else, right? And so they lose that context. They lose, you no longer immediately know, it's not immediately obvious that something has been created. And so this is a form of political propaganda where, there've always been pictures of staged photos of candidates kissing babies or, doing what have you to try to make them more likable to certain groups of people. But now it's very interesting because anyone can do it. It's not tied directly to a campaign, far more persuasive. And again, even if the original creator is ethical and discloses it, that it's kind of lost very quickly in the real world, in the sort of wilds of the internet. We see this with spam and scams too. So we see, for example, we just did this study of what we called Shrimp Jesus. And Shrimp Jesus was an interesting case because, again, this is obviously not real, right? It's photorealistic, it's very weird, but it obviously there's not a thing that exists anywhere in the world. And yet it gets wild amounts of engagement. And as we were looking at these pages, we noticed that the point of a lot of them was to engage with people who they thought were dupes, right? To kind of, this was a sensational piece of art, but they had a lot that were much more realistic. And they were trying to get people to comment, and then they would kind of reach out to the people who were commenting, who were saying, oh, I really like your art, I really like this product. And then they would try to sell them products that didn't exist, or talk to them about who they were, try to get personal information from them. And this was really disproportionately seemed to be talking to elderly people who were a little bit older. And so again, that sort of generational phenomenon of people who are not extremely online, using these tools themselves, talking, on the internet every day, don't necessarily have an immediate understanding when they see an AI-generated image of what they're looking at. So it does create interesting opportunities for spam and scams. And what you've started to see is a lot of people who do understand what's happening, reaching out to the people who comment on this stuff to say, hey, this isn't real, and I've talked to some of them about why they do that. And they say, oh, my elderly relatives, they're sharing this stuff constantly, and I feel like I need to warn people. So it's an interesting dynamic around helping people who are not so clear understand what's going on. And then finally, there's the explicitly exploitative, right? And that's the thing that is very real and is happening. And so at SIO, we've been writing, this was an image that was made to look younger, right? You can create women who don't exist. You can create women who do exist, in fact, and you can then you can age them down. You can take their clothes off. You can do all sorts of things that are, again, both ethically and legally very, very bad. But it is something that we are seeing, and that kind of thing actually is happening a little bit more in younger spaces, particularly for people who think that it's kind of a prank or a way to get at somebody. And so we're starting to see some of those dynamics in schools, early as middle school, trying to explain, what does the curriculum look like? Same way you have to tell the older people that, the picture of the beautiful wood carving is not real. With younger people, it's making them understand that this is actually extremely serious and often very, very illegal, in addition to being quite immoral. So that dynamic is happening a little bit more in the open source communities. And then since I'm not totally sure, I think we had to stop at 2. I didn't know if you guys wanted to do questions, so I can't even sort of pause after this if you want to have some questions. But the thing that's happening, the sort of unintended consequence of all of this is that as deepfakes become widespread, the public has more difficulty being able to discern what's real or not, because you see a picture and you stare at it and you try to figure out if it's AI or not. And it really puts you, it creates the ability not only to create something that is false, but to undermine confidence in things that are real. And this is something, I heard folks talking about Israel-Gaza in one of the prior panels. This is the sort of thing that happens in conflict zone situations, right? You can decide to believe or not believe a piece of content, an image, depending on how you feel about the side that has put it out. And so that, I think, is actually one of the most challenging and potentially destructive aspects of this, which is just that when you don't know if something is true, the way that intersects with the broader system of society is that you're going to decide in large part based on what your friends and peers think, or on whether you trust the media outlet that's put it out. And the problem is oftentimes, particularly, I've seen creators on TikTok sharing some of this stuff. They don't know if it's real or not either, right? And so this stuff goes viral very, very quickly, in part because the person sees it, feels emotionally connected to it, shares it, and then you start to see the war about whether or not it's AI happen in the comments. And unfortunately, as so often happens with misinformation or rumors or fake content on the internet, the correction, when somebody has actually done the work to authenticate an image, does not go nearly as far as the initial piece of content does. And so you have that very significant gap in perception, again, where people either believe something that is not true or kind of have permission to disbelieve something that is true. And I lost my quote attribution on here. This is from Danielle Citron and Bobby Chesney's paper on the liar's dividend, which came out again right around 2018 as the deep fake dynamics were happening. So I'll just close with one thing, which is, why is social media relevant to this? And the answer is because social media is where it's distributed. So you can create all of the political propaganda, exploitive content, and spam and scam stuff in the world, but social media offers the distribution vehicle for it. So social media took the cost of distribution to zero, something like 10, 15 years ago at this point. So you have now zero cost of creation, zero cost of distribution, and a very distrustful society. And so when we're looking at trying to understand the ways in which AI, which again has the potential to be profoundly useful in many ways, as we're looking at the adversarial implications, it's really important to keep in mind that it's not just the creation, it's the way that the creation, distribution, and distrust mechanisms are intersecting today. So for young people, I think it's really important to understand, your role in creating, the power that you have to create, what you do with it. And then also, I've been really encouraged by watching these people who, sit there posting the, the little warnings, like, or, helping their older family members understand what's happening. So I think it's a really interesting space with different implications for different generations at this point.
Thank you, Renee. I'm just going to ask you 2 really quick questions. And so one is that, given that we have so many young people and educators in this room, how does the Stanford Internet Observatory begin to think about AI in schools?
That is a really great question. So we don't have our own intersection with schools in like a media literacy capacity. So what we've started to do is speak with people who do. I periodically do work with the News Literacy Project. They make a lot of content that does appear in schools. I remember a couple of years back, it was during the pandemic, I did a video module with them on conspiracy theories, right? And the point was just to make these like digestible little video clips that explained different facets of it. So I think people like News Literacy Project, and then Common Sense Media is another one that does have already like quite a broad distribution into several million schools. And so that provides a way to get the curriculum to people. I've had phone calls with principals in some schools who want to, they reach out because they've seen a report we've done and they just want to talk about it. It's very ad hoc. It's not something where we have a sustained engagement. But I think questions around like, particularly for things like the notification apps, people are now scrambling to figure out how do you work that into a curriculum and something that's age appropriate for middle school, high school, and later.
That's perfect. Just my last question is, can you share more on the current state of tools to detect AI-generated content?
So it's very much a cat and mouse game. It's actually quite complicated. So the shrimp Jesus paper is Facebook did respond to us when we put it out, right? We kind of articulated like, here's what we're seeing, here's the work, here's the stats, here's the abundantly clear, like we're talking hundreds of millions of engagements. We're not talking about small numbers of engagements here. Like people are really engaging with this content. And the recommender systems were doing a lot to boost it too. And so they did respond to us about finding evidence of inauthenticity in some of the pages, taking action on others around their spam, basically the spam policy. They have a name for it that I don't recall off the top of my head, the kind of content quality policies. What they are going to be doing is rolling out labeling. But this is an interesting challenge, right? Because one thing that happens when you label something, for example, you start labeling some images as imagined by AI. This is supposed to start in May. This is an interesting thing because then when you don't see something that's labeled as imagined by AI, your assumption is to believe that it's then real. But this gets at that sort of liar's dividend problem combined with the open source model problem, which is while some industry participants are working to develop unremovable watermarks that will allow another system to discern that something is AI generated. Oh, this came from Midjourney. Oh, this came from Gemini, et cetera. Other entities are not going to participate in those programs. And particularly, again, as I said, with the open source model stuff, a lot of the most kind of egregious content is being created using those tools because the major platforms, the major AI creation tools already have policies that prevent certain types of, creating nudes of celebrities and things like this, right? So the worst offenders are not going to participate in these things. And so it does lead even the dissemination platforms like Facebook and, God knows what X will do, but Facebook and some of the others to try to determine whether something is AI, it really kind of puts the ball in their court. And this is why there's a bunch of collaborations happening. But if you see something that is not labeled, it doesn't necessarily mean that it is either real or true. And that's the interesting challenge that we're having here.
Can I jump in and ask one final question because this is all so interesting and AI is obviously on everyone's mind today. And this is also one question in the chat, which especially came to mind because hearing Sam Altman talk about AI obviously has a very optimistic lens on the impact it'll have in the long term. How do you think about 10 years from now? Do you think we'll view AI as having positively impacted society overall, negatively impacted society? Obviously very mixed. How do you think about that?
So I think what I would say is when we say AI is a huge catch-all, right? Oftentimes, so there's AI for, we're talking about generative AI here, right? Again, because this is the thing that we all have access to, but there's plenty of AI systems, machine learning, they're kind of used synonymously, which can help, for example, detect cancer earlier or faster in a scan, right? That can be used for rapidly iterating through, drug design, right? There's a lot of different profound applications for artificial intelligence outside of the realm of generative content that I think are going to be profoundly impactful and hugely important. I think my hesitance with the generative stuff, I feel the worst about the audio. In part because voice is used as an authenticator now. So if you call your, for me, if I call my like my health insurance company or something like that, the thing that you have to do, they're like, oh, we've already authenticated you. We authenticated you with your voice. You know, I'm like, okay, well, there's a lot of recordings of me on the internet, and it's really not hard. It's really not hard to do. And when you make it even easier, I guess what I struggle with sometimes is like why we need that. There's arguments to be made for folks who have you know, voice challenges, or some like arguments about accessibility and things like this. But I think that there are certain ways in which it's going to become, you know, we're going to have to sort of adapt and think through what it means when we start receiving phone calls from people who sound like family members but aren't, or from people who sound like your boss telling you to wire money somewhere or do something, and you having to make a, you know, kind of a quick determination of whether this is real or a scam. So I do think there are a lot of downsides to the to some facets of the generative stuff. Again, I think voice in particular, but you know, here we are. So I think at this point, it's more a matter of how do we use education and adaptation, and then create accountability for the companies that produce the tools if and when they're misused.
Thank you so much. That was very insightful. AI is obviously top of mind for everyone, and so thank you for addressing the elephant in the room. I'd also like to thank Professor Hancock, Dr. Moreno, Emma, Aidan, Mr. Resta, everybody for making this summit so wonderful. And with that, James, you can give us a little closing.
Thank you so much, Saahil. And again, thank you so much, Renee. I'm James Park, a co-director of Unwiring. I know we're running a little bit over, but I'd like to give a quick closing word. First of all, to the presenters, thank you all so much for sharing your incredible work and wisdom. I know that I and so many others at the summit today have appreciated your thoughtfulness and care with addressing social media and youth well-being, as well as your teachings about the past, present, and the future impacts of this technology. I think I especially appreciated the thorough line that social media is powerful in helpful ways and harmful ways. As Professor Hancock mentioned, the safety measures of social media can and should be increased, similar to the approach to cars and driving over the past 100 years. And like how Dr. Moreno mentioned, how social media is like a hammer, able to build something incredible, but also able to break something or someone down. It's so crucial to move towards a relationship with social media and our communities that, as Emma Lembke said in the panel, is mutualistic rather than parasitic. I really appreciated that. To the audience members participating, thank you so much for taking part in the summit. This conference has really just been a labor of love for everyone involved, whether that's Unwiring's Team Summit or the presenters themselves, and we couldn't be more grateful for all for participating. If you're interested in more resources, whether it's educational videos, parent workshops, or more about our ReDesign challenge, or have more questions, I know we weren't able to get to all of them, please check out our website, unwiring.org. We just would love to stay connected and hear your ideas on how we can together best support this movement. Social media has deep and harmful impacts on our communities, especially younger generations like us, who have grown up with this technology. I think it's also something that we can work to change together. And after today's summit, we've all learned so much, and I hope we all can have so much more hope for our future with social media. Thank you all so much for coming, and we hope to reconnect with you all in the future.